Welcome to a deep dive into the world of Fyodor Dostoevsky. Today we're going beyond the novels themselves. We're going to be exploring the art of translation. And to guide us, we have an incredible translator joining us. And they're about to release a brand new translation of The Brothers Karamazov. It's interesting, this translator's path to Dostoevsky, well, it actually began in a way you might not expect. It began with the launch of Sputnik in 1957. Can you imagine? The Soviet satellite sparking this lifelong passion for Russian literature. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment and how it shaped your journey?
Yeah, Sputnik was more than just a satellite. It really was a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, the Soviet Union wasn't this far off land. It felt like a challenge, this mystery right above our heads. And at the time, I was fascinated by space. Of course, I dreamed of being an astrophysicist, but learning the language opened up a whole other universe for me, the world of Russian literature.
Okay, so aspiring astrophysicist becomes a Dostoevsky expert. That's quite the leap. Was there a particular work that made you realize that literature was your calling?
It's hard to pinpoint a single moment.
Yeah.
But I do think that reading War and Peace and Crime and Punishment and the original Russian, it was really transformative for me. The sheer depth of emotion, the psychological complexity. It was like seeing the world anew. And I knew then that I wanted to help others experience that same power.
Wow, that's incredible. And now you're tackling The Brothers Karamazov. Arguably one of Dostoevsky's most challenging works. There are already several English translations out there. So what made you decide to embark on this new translation? What did you feel was missing?
Well, I have immense respect for previous translations, like Constance Garnett's, which introduced Dostoevsky to so many English readers. But as I delved deeper into his work, I felt some of the nuances. The music of his language was getting lost in translation. And I wanted to create a version that captured both the raw emotion and the philosophical depth, something that would resonate with modern readers without sacrificing accuracy.
All right, it sounds like you're aiming for a very delicate balance there. And it's not just Wei Yu involved, is it? You've mentioned working with Norton, a publisher known for its meticulous approach to literary translation. What's it been like collaborating with them on this project?
Working with Norton has been an incredible experience. They understand that translation is a collaborative art. We've gone through countless drafts, debating every word choice, every comma. They brought in a native Russian speaker to ensure authenticity, and the back and forth with the copy editor and proofreaders has been invaluable, I think, together. We've created something truly special.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting a sense of the incredible attention to detail involved here for our listener. Can you paint a picture of what your typical workday looks like when tackling a project of this magnitude?
Sure. Well, it's a mix of solitary focus and intense collaboration. I spend hours poring over the original text, trying to hear the characters' voices in my head, capturing their unique way of speaking. Then there are meetings with the Norton team. Sometimes heated discussions about how best to convey a particular phrase or idiom. It's exhausting, but exhilarating.
I can imagine. Speaking of those voices, you've mentioned listening to the characters. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Especially for a novel like The Brothers Karamazov, where each character has such a distinct personality and worldview.
Well, Dostoevsky was a master of creating characters that leap off the page. For me, the key is capturing their idiolect, the unique way each person expresses themselves. Alyosha's language, for example, is imbued with a gentle spirituality, while Ivan's is sharp, cynical, full of intellectual barbs. It's like acting almost. I had to inhabit each character. To truly find their voice in English,
it sounds like you're almost channeling them. And this idea of multiple voices, or what literary folks call polyphony, it's really woven throughout The Brothers Karamazov. Was there a particular scene or character that posed a unique challenge in capturing that multi-layered dialogue?
One scene that comes to mind is the Grand Inquisitor chapter. You have Ivan, this fiery intellectual, presenting this scathing critique of organized religion, and Alyosha, who's deeply spiritual, is listening with this quiet intensity, capturing the tension in that exchange, the clash of ideologies, while preserving the distinct cadence of each brother's voice was incredibly challenging.
It really is fascinating to think about all the subtle choices that you have to make as a translator. We talked about Dostoevsky's use of Proverbs, especially with the father character. Were there any favorites that you encountered, and how did you approach translating those little nuggets of Russian wisdom?
I love that you picked up on that. The father's language is just peppered with these sayings, and each one reveals so much about Russian culture. There's one that I found particularly striking. It's measure 7 times, cut once. At first glance, it seems straightforward enough. But in the context of the novel, where impulsive decisions have these devastating consequences, it takes on this deeper meaning, a cautionary note that reverberates throughout the story.
Wow. I can see how a simple proverb can suddenly become this really weighty symbol. Speaking of weighty symbols, there's also the challenge of translating Father Zosma's sermons, which, as you mentioned earlier, incorporate Church Slavonic. For those of us who are unfamiliar with that, could you explain how it differs from everyday Russian and why that presented such a unique hurdle for you?
Imagine trying to translate Shakespeare with all its archaic language and poetic flourishes, but also having to weave in Latin phrases. That's kind of what it felt like. Church Slavonic has this ancient, almost mystical quality to it. And capturing that in English without losing the meaning. There was a real tightrope walk. I actually had to consult with a specialist in liturgical texts to make sure I was getting the nuances right.
It's really incredible. It's like you're juggling multiple languages, historical contexts, character voices, all at once. It makes me think about that secret weapon you mentioned, your network of fellow translators and Dostoevsky experts. Can you share an instance where you had to call on them for help? What was that process like?
There was one scene in The Brothers Karamazov that had me completely stumped. It involved a very specific Russian saying about a bird in a cage, and I just couldn't find an English equivalent. That captured the same sense of longing and confinement. So I reached out to my listserv, described the scene and the Proverbs context. And within hours, I had a dozen different suggestions from experts all over the world. It was a lifesaver.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like a true testament to the collaborative spirit of scholarship. And speaking of collaboration, let's talk about that tantalizing question that's been hanging in the air. If you could ask Dostoevsky himself one question about the brothers Karamazov, what would it be?
You know, of all the questions I could ask, the one that keeps coming back to me is about the ending. Did he truly intend to leave it so open-ended? Did he envision a sequel, like that note in the preface suggests? Or was it a deliberate choice, a way to challenge us, the readers, to grapple with the unresolved questions of faith, morality, and human destiny?
It's like he's inviting us to continue the conversation, to wrestle with these themes long after we've finished the last page. Speaking of grappling with themes, you know Dostoevsky was also a keen observer of the social and political landscape of his time. His work touches on issues of poverty, crime, the rise of radical ideologies. Did you find yourself drawing parallels between 19th century Russia and our own world today?
Absolutely. Dostoevsky's concerns about social inequality, the alienation of the individual, the dangers of ideological extremism, they feel eerily relevant to our own time. You know, it's a reminder that while technology and societal structures may change, the fundamental questions about human nature, the struggle between good and evil, the search for meaning in a chaotic world, those are timeless. And that's precisely what makes his work so enduring.
It's like he's holding up this mirror to our own anxieties and aspirations. And thanks to your work as a translator, his voice can continue to reach new audiences and spark these conversations across cultures and generations. Now, for our listener who may be inspired to delve into Dostoevsky's world, is there a particular novel that you'd recommend as a starting point? What advice would you give someone approaching his work for the first time?
That's a great question. You know, Dostoevsky can be daunting for a first-time reader. His works are dense, emotionally intense, and packed with philosophical ideas. If someone is looking for a lighter beach read, this isn't it. But for those ready to dive into the depths of the human psyche, there's no one quite like him.
That's a really good point. I often recommend Crime and Punishment as a starting point. It's a gripping psychological thriller that explores themes of guilt, morality, and redemption. Plus, it's one of his shorter novels, which can make it feel a little less intimidating.
Yeah, that's true. And once you've kind of experienced the intensity of Crime and Punishment, you might be ready for the epic scope of The Brothers Karamazov. It's a masterpiece that touches on virtually every aspect of the human condition. Faith, doubt, love, betrayal, family, society, you name it. It's in there.
And speaking of The Brothers Karamazov, we've been talking about your new translation, which I'm sure many of our listeners are eager to get their hands on. What are you most excited for readers to experience in this fresh take on a classic?
Oh, that's a tough one. There are so many layers to this novel, so many hidden gems. But I think what I'm most excited about is how this translation brings out the musicality of Dostoevsky's language. He was a master of rhythm and cadence. And I've really tried to capture that flow in my English version. I hope readers will feel like they're hearing Dostoevsky's voice anew with all its passion, its raw energy, its profound humanity.
It's incredible. And let's not forget about that stunning cover design you mentioned earlier. Without giving too much away, what can you tell us about it and how it reflects the spirit of the novel?
Well, I can't reveal all the secrets, but I will say that the cover artist has done an incredible job of capturing the novel's themes of light and darkness, good and evil, faith and doubt. It's a visually striking image that will draw readers in and hopefully spark their curiosity about the story that unfolds within those pages.
It sounds like a true work of art, both inside and out. You've given our listeners a really fascinating glimpse into the art of translation itself. It's clearly much more than just finding the right words in another language. It's about capturing the soul of the original work, its essence, its impact.
Absolutely. Translation is about building bridges between cultures, connecting readers with voices and perspectives they might not otherwise encounter. It's challenging, but deeply rewarding. And I feel incredibly privileged to be able to share Dostoevsky's brilliance with a wider audience.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and passion for Dostoevsky with us. It's been an incredibly illuminating conversation, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling inspired to embark on their own Dostoevsky adventures.
It was my pleasure. I always enjoy talking about Dostoevsky, and I hope our conversation today will encourage listeners to explore his works with fresh eyes and open hearts.
And who knows, maybe they'll even be inspired to imagine that sequel to the brothers Karamazov that Dostoevsky hinted at but never wrote. The possibilities are endless. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Dostoevsky. We hope you've enjoyed the journey. And we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration